Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's topic of the week. My name is Alec, and we have Joshua Cheatham on the line as well. For today's topic of the week episode, we're going to be going into depth into kind of a concept slash thing that already exists, but we're gonna be a little creative this episode, and what we're thinking of is the U.S.'s version of the Belt and Road Initiative. So, for the Belt and Road Initiative, for those who may know, is a Chinese initiative to simply push investment into other countries. Chinese have invested a lot of money into infrastructure in Africa, countries in Asia, and Latin America to use it as a hand of influence into these different countries and kind of get access to resources, but also spread Chinese influence as well to improve their soft power around the world. So, one thing that the United States is good at is our hard power, and hard power is referring to things like military technology and showing flexing our muscles essentially around the world. But where the U.S. can improve, and which is soft power. The United States does flex our muscles a little too much on the hard power side, which we end up being the world's policing power. But why can't we be kind of the center for economic investments, which we are? I'm not saying we aren't, but we can flex more of our soft power muscle around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, the Chinese, when they created their version of the Silk Road, which is an ancient, trade route between Europe, parts of Africa, they were really, like Alex said, envisioning a Chinese influenced world where they were the ones taking down the dominant West. They were the ones putting their first foot forward, and they were the ones that everyone was going to turn to. And so that is what their goal, their investments included over $1 trillion, over 3,000 infrastructure projects, which, by the way, is on par with the World Bank. And if I were the World Bank, I'd be kind of embarrassed considering China is one country and the World Bank is multiple countries investing in it. But investments include ports, roads, train systems, energy, telecommunications, and trade routes. They were looked to from a lot of third world countries as like, oh, this is great. Someone's actually investing in us. There, someone's giving a crap about us. But the reality is that China exploited many of these countries, especially the ones in Africa, leaving them in billions of dollars worth of debt. And what we've definitely said many times in the coined phrase of debt trap diplomacy. And so, yeah, like Alex said, we're here to envision the United States' own version, which can also include Western countries, in investing in the rest of the world. And just to throw out some investments that the United States is already doing in terms of numbers, and Alec has more than I do on this information, but 6 billion has been invested in Africa, 3 billion has been invested just this in 2023, sorry. 3 billion has been invested in Latin America. And there wasn't any data on Asian countries, but the Pacific Island nations, post the G20 summit and the summit at the White House with the Pacific Island nations, 812 million has been invested in those nations. To be compared, though, to the 160 billion that was just recently proposed by the Biden administration to be sent out in aid packages to Ukraine and Israel. And I'm not trying to put out that this is bad. We obviously should be sending our military support in terms of for especially Ukraine, but also supporting in aid towards the people of Gaza and Israel that have been affected by the conflict. But what I'm saying is that the funds should be more evenly distributed because there are people in conflict throughout the world. There are also people who need aid throughout the world. And the United States needs to be kind of that bearer that helps out with what the world is doing.
Mhm. And that kind of goes into my first point, which is in order to kind of create our own Belt and Road Initiative is a strengthening of these international institutions. Um, and it's kind of a great segue into this conversation. The first step is not to actually go in and invest, but to before we do all that, we need to have the system in place to support um, these kind of activities. We've seen multiple times where these international institutions like the United Nations and other organizations have not been as effective. I can argue that the World Trade Organization has been more effective, kind of piece to the international community and in dealing with trade disputes around the world that happen and serving as a mediator. That I believe is the kind of the only international UN related organization that I think is good. The World Bank is decent as well. They're good at providing poorer regions the investment and the loans they need to kind of develop. But the one thing I do say that the World Bank needs to adjust is kind of where the poverty level is measured, because they take the average of the country. So you can have a really rich person just inflate that average by the actual average, and it kind of reduces the amount the World Bank provides for a country, a business, or whatever it is, because the World Bank can offer country loans to the government or to businesses within a country, down to the grassroots level almost. And the issue with the World Bank is how they measure poverty. It just takes a few rich people to inflate that number within a country, a few corrupt politicians, and the amount a country receives is low. But the World Bank, they're I would give them a good rating. But a lot more work needs to be done at the international level, international institutions to support I don't want to say a Western version of the Belt and Road Initiative. We need a global kind of Belt and Road Initiative that can be spearheaded by the United States because of how much funding, because we are kind of essentially the sole um, biggest investor in these international institutions. That's not to say other countries have not been as involved. Each country equally holds weight in the United Nations. So, but the United States really is biggest focus is to counter the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, which has been proven that it has not worked, and people have seen that it was good on paper, but in reality, it was a big lie.
Yeah, and all those banks are gonna default on their debt very soon, which is why the Chinese economy is not going to fail, but is on the brinks of failure. And a lot of people are afraid of that. But anywho, moving on from that, the United States has a big issue with not understanding how to budget and move funds correctly, overcompensating for funds in a
Yep.
sense, and we also overcompensate for funds on the international scale. But so the United States has given 160 billion, or is going has requested, Joe Biden in the White House has requested 160 billion in funds to be moved to Israel and Ukraine. 140 of those billion is going to be strictly for Israel. 20 billion is going to be added on to the already 100 billion we've already spent in Ukraine. And this is where I have a big major issue for the United States, because what the United States is looking at the short run investment now. If you talk to anybody who I'm very pro military. I'm pro understanding and flexing our muscles. I understand the need to invest in Ukraine and the war, but we've spent so much money on that war. Why can't we have other countries within the EU help pick up the slack on that investment and work to invest in that countries? And also, why isn't the United States trying to use more of its money to invest in other countries? $6 billion is being sent in aid and infrastructure to the entire 55, 50, or 54 countries of Africa. That's like giving,
A fraction.
that's like going up to somebody and saying, "Hey, I want to pay you for 40 hours of work this week, but I'm only going to give you $10." That's basically the equivalent of what they're giving to Africa, because 6 billion wouldn't cover remodeling the infrastructure for the state of Texas in the United States. So that is a fault, and it's the same in South America, $3 billion. I mean, how can you justify that? There's in South and Central America, there's over, I think, 30 countries. You can't justify it. And so the United States needs to really reconsider where it's investing its money and understand that, yeah, they're putting up a lot of upfront costs right now, but in the long run, investing in these communities to get their natural resources, to get their future trade, and also seeing a future of stability within Africa is going to far outweigh these costs up front because right now we're spending so much money on defense. And it's going to be continue spending money on defense because we're not solving the root issue of the problem, which is money. Nobody has money in those countries, and also they don't have a government. And unfortunately, you need money to govern. That's just facts. But like you need money to govern.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
You can't do anything without it, and it's just the world we live in.
yeah,
And you were talking about a grassroots approach, which is what this sort of Belt and Road Initiative of the United States' version should be, which is a grassroots level approach to all countries around the world. To, as you said, these types of issues stem from lack of an economy, lack of governmental structure, no jobs for the people to partake in. So if there's no jobs, if there's no stable judiciary system, there's no government, people are going to resort to conflict, to finding new ways to make money illegal, majority of the cases. And the United States can solve a lot of problems. They're not maybe going to solve all of them because of, again, geopolitical ideologies and believing. For example, if the United States were to pour money and invest in Ukraine, Russia would still want to take Ukraine, but it can mitigate a chance of a what I'm envisioning is should the United States had invested lots of money into improving the corruption problems in Ukraine, to investing in its agriculture, Russia may not have been as kind of wanting to invade Ukraine because now there's U.S. influence within Ukraine, and that'd be very dangerous. So it's kind of like that weight of U.S. investment in these countries, and not only will that solve geopolitical stuff, but also you take a grassroots approach, and you're providing people jobs, you're providing people money, money is circulating. You don't got to worry about that. It's about that location until some issue pops up where the U.S. and other partners of the United States can go in there and solve disputes diplomatically. And with the what I'm thinking is like with the new Ecuadorian president, he has a big influence in bananas, right? Why can't the United States step in and say, "Hey, listen, I know you have 180 days. Um, Here's what we could do to help you out to get banana exports out, agricultural exports out. Let's help fix your constitution. Let's get rid of these cartel problems." The drug problem in the United States can be, and I don't want to make this as a kind of like a simple problem to fix, which is not. But the first step is to invest lots of money into these countries, and that's what Latin America is. That's what China is doing in Latin America.
yeah. And the other course that in terms of what the United States and the West needs to do is prove that they are going to be better than what China is. Because the problem is now is that China's
Mm-hmm.
come in and they're like, oh, they've taken advantage of us. Their infrastructure sucks. It's breaking, it's cracking, it's cheap. We have horrible telecommunications for billions of dollars of debt. What? We're not going to trust anybody. And the United States, what the United States needs to do is say, we see what you're saying. We understand that the Chinese it absolutely exploited you, and it was horrible what they did. But we have proof that we can do better. And it's called the Marshall Plan. Post World War II, let's just put this in perspective. 70, how many years ago is it now? Over 75 years ago now, Europe, and Japan were decimated. Like, there were no roads, there were no buildings. There was nothing there because it was decimated by the most gruesome war this world has ever seen. You would not be able to know that there is a war now. You wouldn't have been able to know that there was a war just 20 something years later because of the effectiveness of the Marshall Plan that the United States led to rebuild Europe and also help rebuild Japan. You would have no idea. And the United States needs to put that focus on look at what we did after a war. You guys, we're going into a lot of African countries where there is no war. They just need there's nothing there essentially. They need to go there and say this is a clean slate. This is a blanket statement. We can go in there and just you whatever you want, we can do. We don't got to rebuild. You want the nicest, newest bridges and newest telecommunication systems and financial banks. We can help you out with that. This is blank slate. And that is what the United States needs to show. They need to say, look what we did during war times with a decimated country, with decimated countries. What can you think we can do with your country now with with trillions of dollars more money, trillions of dollars, and more manpower?
And what I want to add on that, going back to the trust thing, right? The United States has not been so kind of countries have seen the United States and they've been a little hesitant because of our bureaucracies.
Yeah,
I'm gonna quote. I'm gonna look at U.S. aid for example, right? When you delegate a task to the U.S. aid, and I'm not trying to say anything bad about the U.S. aid. U.S. aid is good because they have the knowledge and the expertise for all things development work. But one thing they suck at is money. They are terrible with how they use money. If you give money to USA, they will use it to spend to cover their debts that they have. And USA, it's no fault of their own because they can find ways to make the development work cheaper. The problem is that the government does not allow these bureaucracies to source things more locally. That any investment that goes on has to be brought by America. They need to be American products, American services, and American boots on the ground to go and fix and invest into these countries. And USAID is kind of limited because of that, and because they suck at budgeting. So it's kind of like a knife with two edges here. So that's kind of where trust issues stem from is the inability for these bureaucracies to work properly
yeah,
that relate to international development. So if we're going to build trust, it's taking a step back and looking at our bureaucracies and saying this is just not it. When the United States pledges to give money to other countries, it should be direct, bank to bank, bank to person, bank to business. If you get what I'm
yeah.
saying.
No, that makes perfect sense because you're talking about bureaucracy, and that's a big problem because of the agencies and how they use their funds and how they're uh just not correctly using their discretionary funds. But you also have to think about how could people trust the United States with this current political climate that we're living in. As of this recording on 10/25, we have just received the Speaker of the House for the first time in 3 weeks. We have the most politically divided government in history for the United States since the Civil War. And so, how is a country going to trust that the U.S. is going to even give them aid in the first place? I mean, let alone that the U.S. aid gets that money and what they do with it. Now we have to think about, is U.S. aid going to get the money at all? That's the other that's the new issue that the world is having to deal with, and we discussed this last week on a topic of the week is how American polarization is affecting the international community. Well, this is exactly when we're talking about a Belt and Road Initiative. The United States can't do it without figuring out their internal politics because, in my opinion, there are a few things that the U.S. government and both sides should not have a partisan view. And one of those things that it should be bipartisan is foreign direct investments. That should be a nonpartisan issue because the benefits of investing in countries like in Latin America, like well, when Venezuela becomes a democracy, hopefully one day, like Venezuela, like Ecuador, like Nigeria and South Africa, are oil-rich countries and resource-rich countries, those benefits are much higher and deserve to be. We just have to take the brunt in the upfront costs to get the benefits after a couple of years. And so that's where I think the U.S. is going that this whole Belt and Road Initiative is going to be very difficult. It's obviously a concept that we're discussing, but we want to bring up obviously the cons of what can happen because that unfortunately nowadays is a con. If you would have said 20 years ago, can the U.S. invest foreignly and have no issues? Under the Bush administration, under the Biden administration, even under the beginning of the first half of the Trump administration, I would have told you, no problem. U.S. is going to do it. But towards the second half of the Trump administration, this Biden administration, this new Congress, the 118th Congress, absolutely no way can we get aid out in an efficient manner.
I totally agree. The one thing I do want to talk about now is kind of like what the United States has been doing that's been effective and where we need to build on. The one thing the United States is has been doing is they have been investing. They've been planning to create new investments and new corridors. The first thing I want to talk about is IMEC, which is the kind of new um, the United States wanting to connect India, the Arab Gulf, Europe, and the Libido corridor in Africa through railways and shipping lines to kind of reduce reliance on China for minerals and respond to kind of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. And this is a fantastic step in the right direction. This came from last month's G20 summit, and we're talking about it now again because this is the type of things that we need to see more of. Another thing I want to talk about is USMCA. U.S. China trade has been overtaken by U.S. Mexico trade, and Mexico is the biggest trading partner of the United States. And in Africa, they have back in towards the tail end of 2022, they plan to commit another 55 billion to Africa over the next 3 years. We have investments all over the world. The issue is we suck at connecting everything to make one network. We have things here, we have things there, we have things over there, over beyond yonder, but we don't connect it. There's too much bureaucratic red tape. The United States can't even figure out its own problems within. So we have the tools and we have the mindset and we have the plans to do it. I mean, look at IMEC, for example. There's been no actual finance behind it. There's been no balance sheet on how it's going to get done. It's just we say things, we invest, but then I would say like more than half of that money is never even seen
Yeah,
again.
no, and that brings back to the point is how can you trust the U.S. because as president, President Biden is not a technical legislator. He does not have the power to approve or to push legislation. I mean, he has the power to introduce it, but he cannot. Oh, he can't prove it until it's gone through Congress, and so he has to go tell India and the rest of the countries in the IMAC that this is what we want to do. These are the funds that we want to have. This is the plan, and the United States is going to promise this. But the reality is, the United States can't promise this. The reality is, Joe Biden has to fly back to the United States, go to the Speaker of the House to get this funding, this appropriations introduced to the floor, and pray to the gods above that it gets passed. That's the reality of it. And in this political climate, a bill like that would seemingly benefit the United States and our workers tenfold would likely get struck down in this Congress. And so that is the biggest issue in trust for the U.S. And you're right; those are all great initiatives. The USMCA that was authored by the Trump administration, absolutely brilliant trade agreement, and I think IMAC is a brilliant proposal, and it is going to help the United States and benefit the rest of the world. And you're right; is the version of the Western Belt and the Belt and Road Initiative we've been looking for. But I I hate to say this and be that Debbie Downer, but the reality of the IMAC actually becoming something that the U.S. participates in is very, very slim at this moment in time.
And I think we need these countries that, for example, like India, Europe, um, Middle Eastern countries, MENA countries that I even to say, listen, you promised us this, we wanted to get it done. So then it kind of needs to be a check on the United
Absolutely.
States. But if there is no check on the United States, then what's not to say, okay, well, if you don't want to work with us, then we'll just continue working with China until you figure it out. So there needs to be some sort of check on the United States where these countries say, you promised us this and let's get it done. There's been no legal binding kind of piece to this. They've just announced that they're going to work on something like this, but I have not seen any sort of real progress lately. And if anyone has seen real
Let
progress,
us
to
know.
please forward it to us, and we want to see because I have not in my research seen any kind of forward moving progress. And with the Israel Palestine problem, it's kind of caused a lot of backwards moving. So the first step really is to get IMEC going is to see what the United States is going to do about Israel and Palestine. And sending in two carriers is just not it's just not going to be it. What message are they sending to these Middle Eastern countries that the United States wants to
Yeah,
work with?
it's not a great message to be honest, and especially after Saudi Arabia was trying to broker a deal to recognize Israel, it would have been the fifth country in the Middle East to recognize Israel, and not only the fifth country, but the largest of the Middle Eastern countries in terms of GDP and influence. Um, yeah, this is like we were saying a concept, but it's a very difficult concept. It's something the United States could do for sure. It's something the United States needs to focus on to build a plan on. I totally think in the future, and we need to sort out our own politics first, but there's a lot of roadblocks in the way, and so what's going to likely end up happening in the next few years is just continued conflict, and that's a sad reality.
And I think another way we're going to address it, to first step to kind of Middle Eastern investment is with Israel. Israel's far right government is just not good for Middle Eastern development. And what the United States should do is instead of printing out money and giving it to Israel to say, listen, we want you to use this money for development and working with your neighbors. And if you're not going to work with your neighbors and if you're not going to invest and build and help be a part of Middle Eastern development, we're going to withhold these loans and grants from you. Um, it'll kind of go against United States' Israel's kind of the United States' U.S. Israel stance, but we live in a time and place where economic investment should be taking priority, and the United States should be investing in places like Palestine as well. If they could solve the two-state solution, this would also help with their kind of own version of the Belt and Road Initiative to show that the United States' initiative can not only go beyond um, economic issues, but we can also solve geopolitical issues with money,
Exactly.
which is weird to say, but
Listen,
it's
it's the reason Europe is not at war right now. Money. I mean, that's just that. Like they've been to war how many times?
it's a
How
hard
many times in
reality.
history? But when the EU was formed post World War II, I mean, how can you start a war? You have so much money on the line, so much trade, billions of dollars of trade and money on the line. You're not gonna fight your neighbor over that kind of money. You're not because you know the end is going to not justify the means. You're gonna get destroyed, and then there's nothing for either of you. So what was the end goal? You know?
And it takes a while to go back to what you were
Yeah,
economically. I mean, look where we're at now. An inflation crisis, which then stemmed into high interest rates to terrible housing market, and it just keeps piling on and on. And it's this kind of like I don't want to use the word economic chokehold, but kind of like a press for more a push for more economic development, and in the Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia, for example, should go up to Israel and say, listen, we have money and we want to improve the Israel Palestine conflict and invest in both states. But if you're just going to keep doing this, then we're going to continue to not recognize you, and that's the game they want to play. And what is the United States going to do? Go back Israel, but would they want to lose out on Middle Eastern partners? The United States does not want to afford that. So we live in a time where where both money and weapons are just, how do I say this? It's kind of like where money has just been the overall persuader of everything, and money has been the persuader for many years now, and it's going to continue being a persuasion tool um, as kind of the world develops further.
Absolutely.
But that's all I got. If you
Nope,
got
all
anything
set.
else, all right. Well, thank you everyone for listening in to this week's topic of the week. We hope you enjoyed this little hypothetical episode. We kind of love doing these hypothetical ones. But yeah, so stay tuned for the next topic of the week.